Hi everyone, welcome to the online lecture. It's actually going to be two lectures this week because I thought rather than do one long one, I'll split it up into two shorter recordings for this week when I'm away. And as I put up on Moodle, all activities, both the tutorials and the lectures this week, are online. But I'll see you the following week. So this week we're looking at planning for learners in respect to diversity. And the idea of literacy as a social practice. There will also be some connections to your second assignment, particularly for the planning part. So as I said, I have split this up into two components, and I did send through two readings, one as a PDF and one with a link to an ebook, which actually are a better fit with the idea of diversity rather than the chapters that were in WINCH, which is all to do with assessment. So the learning intention this week is for you to develop your understanding of how to incorporate effective strategies to develop resources to support diversity in literacy programs, and to develop your understanding of effective teaching and learning strategies when working with Indigenous students. My computer is playing up today, so hopefully I won't get any more weird error messages popping up. Anyway, you should be able to explain at least three specific considerations to keep in mind when you're planning for Aboriginal students at the end of this. Oh, why is this not working? Right. So what do we mean by diversity, which is the theme or the topic for this week? Well, really it's a term that is used to cover quite a broad range of groups within schools and within society who have different needs and backgrounds, which are obviously something we need to keep in mind as teachers. There's certainly a lot of policy in place to cater, if you like, or to make sure that the needs of diverse groups are met. And some of these needs relate to equity and social justice, which is kind of a democratic principle, making sure that people are given opportunities to become, upstanding members of society. Also the school and social policies that reflect a national value of inclusiveness. So that's kind of the big picture perspective. And then if we drill down to what do we actually do then in our planning and in our teaching. The Melbourne Declaration of the Goals for Young Australians, as with so many other documents in education, actually, again, articulate these ideas in respect to Australia as a nation valuing the central role of education in building a democratic, equitable and just society, a society that's prosperous, cohesive and culturally diverse, rather than blending in constantly, and that values Australia's Indigenous cultures is a key part of the nation's history, present and future. Also that there's a global integration and international mobility that have increased rapidly in the past decade, and the Melbourne Declaration was actually written last decade, so we're looking back even further then. This presents new and exciting opportunities, which heightens the need to nurture an appreciation and respect of social, cultural and religious diversity, which is also part of a sense of global citizenship. So in respect to why diversity is important, it is, in our role as teachers, it's really important for us to actually include inclusive perspectives to help develop a positive discourse, to celebrate diversity and to promote equity and social justice, rather than seeing people who, for example, come to school who are not able to speak English yet, rather than seeing that as a problem with a deficit discourse kind of highlighting the challenges around it. We're looking, and a connotation with that is that we kind of view people as lacking something, rather than viewing it that way. We're having an inclusive perspective where we build people's ability through education and allowing students to achieve as individuals and actually find that they enrich culture and our society. As I said, I'm splitting this up into two parts. The first, which is this recording, we're looking at Aboriginal perspectives and Aboriginal students, and in the next one we're looking at English as a second language or as an additional language. In respect to Aboriginal perspectives and learning, this is one of the cross-curricular priorities in the curriculum, which is also evidenced in the Victorian curriculum. So this should be actually embedded in the learning areas, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. There are two other cross-curricular priorities, but I thought I'd focus on this in first and foremost. The other one is Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia and sustainability, which are the two other cross-curricular priorities. In respect to looking at Aboriginal perspectives, I think it's well worth, and I encourage you to go on the hyperlink here and have a look at the protocols for Koori education in Victorian primary and secondary schools, which has been developed by the Victorian Aboriginal Education Association. You might have noticed, this is kind of me going off on a bit of a thought bubble, but you may have noticed that sometimes we refer to Indigenous Australians, sometimes we refer to Aboriginal Australians. We're meaning the same thing, but Aboriginal is actually the term, I'm told, having asked Auntie Dot, I think it is, Doris, what is actually the preferred term, and according to her, Aboriginal is the word that's preferred, so that's what I'm saying here. And when you look at the literature, if you're looking at policy, for example, most of the time it's Aboriginal, but sometimes you see Indigenous as well. Anyway, so have a look at those protocols, because there's some quite interesting things and considerations to keep in mind. Now, all this actually connects with your second assignment, which is where you outline a series of 5 sessions of learning experience, and you are supposed to include cross-curricular and ELD connections. So this is a cross-curricular part. Now, that doesn't mean that's something that's completely different. It's something that you're including as part of normal practice. You just kind of flag it in that learning sequence. And you could certainly, or I would encourage you to include it in the detailed lessons as well, but certainly for part B, in your outline, they should be included, which is where, just so you know where this fits in. So if we then look at the curriculum in respect to Aboriginal histories and cultures as a cross-curricular priority, there are elaborations that also help with our planning. In general, it might include help with this assignment, but certainly it's something that's there when you're out there working as a teacher all the time. Schools are provided with these elaborations to help support their planning. They give guidance about further opportunities to include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures into the teaching and learning programs. And it is worth pointing or noticing that in the curriculum, there's actually only, particularly when we're looking at it from a literacy perspective, Aboriginal texts are actually only described in the content descriptions for levels 7 and 8, i.e. high school or middle school. But there are certainly opportunities to incorporate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander text across all the levels. So even though they're not prescribed all the time, there's no reason why we can't include them. And you've got a PDF there, link as well. I'm not sure if you come across the 8 ways of learning. This has had a lot of traction in New South Wales. When I was working at CSU, this was huge actually, and it's very big in the in the New South Wales Department of Education, but you can certainly see connections to Victoria as well in Koori curriculum and Queensland as well. So the 8 ways of learning is a pedagogy framework that allows teachers to include Aboriginal perspectives and Aboriginal teaching techniques or learning techniques in a way that just helps the general program. So the focus can remain on the core curriculum, but we're embedding Aboriginal perspectives in the lessons. And I think that's quite a helpful tool for you when you're looking at your sequence to include some of these perspectives. So I'm going to try to unpack it. It originated, so it's actually research-based. It originated at James Cook School of Indigenous Studies in the Western New South Wales regional and the Western New South Wales regional Aboriginal education team. So out of this has been then generated into something that has quite a big impact on practice. So overall, these 8 ways include things like story sharing, community links, deconstruct and reconstruct, which are all things that we can actually easily incorporate within the 5E program, for example. Non-linear thinking, land links, symbols and images, etc., learning maps. I'm going to go through these in a bit more detail so you understand what it is. And again, the idea is not that you squeeze in all 8 ways, but that you include, possibly, if this is one you might want to include as a strategy, you include it where it's a good fit in your learning. And it's not something that's just good for Aboriginal students, it's good for everyone. So it's a way of viewing Aboriginal cultural competence and why it's important, which informs us, obviously. It helps us to include Aboriginal perspectives and using techniques that research has suggested is quite helpful. So it's not just Aboriginal content, it is actually the process, kind of a learning style, if you like, that fits quite nicely. And here you have a bit of a comparison, which is really highlighting what's shared, the common ground between, if we call mainstream and Aboriginal pedagogies. The idea of learning through narrative is something that applies to all of us. If we look at Piaget and learning theories, the idea of the kid focusing on themselves in an egocentric stage, well, that's kind of a connection with that idea. And that we're planning and visualizing explicit processes using mind maps, for example, or charts or KWL charts. All those things are a way of actually planning and visualizing how we go about things. Doing a flow chart we could do as well, or a Y chart. Working non-verbally with self-reflective hands-on methods, thinking about it, not necessarily involving writing and so on. Learning through images and symbols and metaphors, it's something we use across, it's something that is evident in the syllabus as well. It's something that we use when we're looking at English as a second language learners, and also when we're looking at Aboriginal learners and all students. Learning through place and environmental practice, so trying to connect to where we actually are rather than just think of a classroom, but the place-based learning in respect to going out, you know, looking at the schoolyard, looking at the landscape around you and connecting with that, working with community members to enrich a program, for example. Using indirect and innovative and interdisciplinary approaches, which is what we've talked about in the last few weeks as well when we looked at finding links, for example, in those units you looked at from Queensland, which had other disciplines, that had other curriculum content than just literacy, but the idea that we're integrating to get a meaningful picture. Modelling and scaffolding work by working from wholes to parts, so breaking it up, whether we're doing it as a jigsaw, doing group activities, making explicit teaching points, so for example how to scaffold a text or writing a story together, etc. Connecting to local values, needs and knowledge, which is another important consideration. Problem solving and inquiry-based learning, which is a really good fit with these approaches and certainly something that's part of the 5E model as well. However, it is important to keep this in mind because a lot of the time when we're looking at problem solving and inquiry-based learning, it's very question-driven, and that, again, Harrison suggests is actually something that Aboriginal students could struggle with. So we need to, one way of overcoming that is to actually scaffold by offering various possible answers to help bridge that gap. And also, again, something that applies to everyone, providing thinking time. There's also, and this was in your reading, the e-reading that I sent through, there's also quite a lot of research evidence to suggest that particularly Aboriginal students and teenagers too actually are more likely to be keen to display knowledge to peers rather than the whole class, which is something we need to keep in mind both when we're planning and if we're marking something as an assessment component, for example. Obviously, we need to see students' work, but it's something to keep in mind how we want to go about that, so we're aware of what we're doing. There's also research that suggests that Aboriginal students are more likely to try new skills in private or in small groups rather than, again, in a big public space in a whole class thing. So that's another consideration. Aboriginal children tend to work better in groups, but those group activities, and this is really important again, should follow on from explicit modelling, because there's a lot of research that shows that they actually need, well, and again, this is something that applies to a lot of students, really explicit teaching, and then to practice and consolidate those skills within a group, for example, rather than just working by themselves. So the common ground, as I said, and these are the 8 ways of learning, the idea that we connect through the stories we share, which is a good fit with literacy. So story sharing, learning through narrative, whether it's your personal experience or you retelling something. Picture pathways with mapping and visualizing processes, something that you probably find quite an easy thing to connect as part of your sequence again. Applying interpersonal and kinesthetic skills to thinking and learning, so that we see, act, think and share without words, very hands-on kind of learning. Can be something you might want to do in a station, could be literally moving words around or puzzling them up. We saw, when we looked at a video clip, an illustration of practice, there was a mix and match activity where you saw students finding an image to the words, I think, or the vocabulary. That might be something, it's a hands-on task again. Sharing knowledge with art and objects, using images to both illustrate and understand concepts and content. The idea of place-based learning I spoke about. Producing innovations and understandings in a kind of non-linear form that's complementary, so we're finding associations and different ways of thinking about something that we're examining. Deconstructing and reconstructing fits in again with the idea of modelling and scaffolding and explicit teaching. It could be that we start with a broad picture and then zoom in on the small part that they need to practice the skill or develop skill, and then go in to the bigger picture again. And that again, grouping considerations, all that becomes a really clear planning activity, because it means by definition that we're actually having that aspect at several points within the sequence, whether we're looking at the big picture and then to the small and then taking it back. Fits really well with the 5E model again. Bringing new knowledge and sharing that with people, something that's actually really prominent in your learning clubs, the idea that parents are supposed to be invited. I know that one school apparently didn't quite make that happen, but anyway. Connecting to real life purposes, having authentic audiences that we're working with. Again, some important planning considerations. There are, as I said, quite a lot of research that suggests that Aboriginal students benefit very significantly from teachers giving really explicit instruction and modelling. That is one approach that you can see a lot in the Good to Great Schools project that has a lot of traction up in the Northern Territory and in Queensland, and there's a link at the end of these slides where you can find out more about the program as well. Also, providing multiple opportunities to try new skills privately, again, planning consideration, or in groups. And also think about what listening might look like, because eye contact has a cultural dimension. And don't assume that students will necessarily look you in the eyes to show that they're listening. It can be a mark of respect to not do that. So keep that in mind again in how you go about life, if you like. So as I said, there is a link here to Good to Great Schools, which is quite an interesting program. to actually access the resources, I think you need to register, but you can still find out quite a lot about it. And this is part of direct instruction or explicit instruction, which has had quite a lot of fantastic results for a lot of schools. Now, the second part of this recording I'll put up separately, and that's the ELD. So until then, see you. Just stop that.